going to discuss the imminent prospect of war with Iraq. And basically, we're going to do it in a very informal fashion, beginning really at the most personal level. Elaine, you have how many children?
4.
How do you handle them? I mean, how do you... That's a question.
That's a very big question.
How do you handle them in the context of preparing them for the possibility that in a few days there may be war in this region?
Well, 2 of my children we can talk to about the situation in a very watered-down sort of way, my 5-year-old and my 3-year-old. And we can only tell them that there may be something, and we are preparing the house. We're preparing a special room and preparing some things to be in that room. My 2 other children, I have little 10-month-old twins. I don't know how I'm going to get them into this tent that we're supposed to get them in. God forbid the time should arise that we'll need them.
When you talk about a tent, you mean because you can't put a gas mask on?
Right, they're too small for that. Up to 2 years old, there's this tent scene that's used for the kids.
It must have given you a terribly queasy feeling when you went to get your gas mask and you have to try it on your children. I mean, it ceases to be a game for any
parent. I think it would be
parent.
less queasy if we could have tried it on, but in fact, everything is boxed away until the moment where we're instructed to take it out of the boxes. So it's all theoretical to this point, and I hope it will continue to be theoretical.
Mr. Fisher, you've got children also.
Yes, everybody is well aware of the situation, and they're pretty calm. The education system in Israel got the right approach to my elderly kid, which is 8 years old. And the TV is now putting some broadcast on the Israeli TV that prepares the Israeli citizen for the case of war. Of course, we all hope that there will be no war.
The problem, Yael, of confronting war, I know a young man doesn't want to appear to be frightened by it, and I'm not suggesting that you are. But maybe you should be.
Well, I don't think so. I don't think that the chance of me personally getting hit, or my closest family, or my friends, or even of a general missile attack on Israel is large.
Mr. Sharansky, it's your first war here.
If it will be war, yeah.
If it will be war. You have a highly sophisticated and well-developed political nose. What does it tell you?
Well, I can tell you what we are telling to my elder daughter, who is 4 years old, and we are telling her that she knows already stories about ancient wars which Israel had with Roman Empire, with Greece, and we are telling her that today we also have enemies. It's one more war, but definitely it will be much more easier than those wars, and definitely much more easier than what your parents had in Russia. And so she's full of curiosity. For her, it's like a game. I noticed that in the last days, Israelis, in the last 2-3 days, Israelis became much more polite to one another, and a little bit more serious on the streets, less smiles, but daily life continues. And
Elaine, you were nodding there a moment ago. You've noticed the same thing?
No, it's true. I think that it's just heartwarming. It's fantastic. The politeness, and like you're right, they're all of a sudden the nicest people, and the thank yous and the bavakasha, the pleases, it's unbelievable. And in general, I think that there is a sense also beyond that, among ourselves, there's a community sense of, you know, we're in this together, and if something happens, we'll be here together and we'll be helping each other out on this. And there really is a real, I don't know, esprit de corps, how do you say that? There's a real sense of community.
Mr. Fisher, a strange question. Would it be worse for Israel if there is war, or worse if there is not a war?
Well, this is a very difficult question. I think it will be better for Israel if there will be war. I think that if there is no war, Israel will be stuck with Saddam Hussein to face him alone. There will be no large coalition helping us to face his 1 million people army and his mighty force. I think if the coalition will take this force out and bring Saddam Hussein down, our situation will be much easier in the Middle East, and I think the peace process would continue. I think that if there will be no war now, and everybody pulls out, and he pulls out of Kuwait, the pressure on Israel from the United States to go towards a peace conference will be very strong, and I think this solution is not the good solution for Israel.
Mr. Sharansky, that's a terrible thing to hear. I mean, imagine yourself now sitting back in the United States, and there too, there are hundreds of thousands of parents and husbands and wives whose loved ones are over in Saudi Arabia, And I understand what Mr. Fisher was saying, but to hear someone say, better to have the war now.
Well, I'd say that it's always awful to think about the war, not only to have the war. And I hope that there can be found solution without war. On the other hand, I think that it's important that we will face this threat of Saddam Hussein today.
In a sense, Yael, they're talking about you. You're 17 and a half now. What, to be drafted in the Israeli army, what,
About-
18?
Mm-hmm.
So you're about 6 months away from that.
Yes, about 6 months.
In a sense, they're talking about the war they hope you don't have to fight.
I hope so too. And, well, I agree with both of them. I think that, however it may sound cynic, I think that war now would be better for Israel and for the whole world compared to a war 5 years from now, when Iraq will own atomic weapons and biological weapons and may be a threat not to Israel, but to the whole world.
Mr. Fisher, do you think there's going to be a war
I think there will be a war.
soon?
I think there will be a war by the end of the month.
Elaine?
I think there'll be something, some sort of explosion of some sort. I don't know the dimensions of it. I don't know how much, if we will be involved in Israel at all, but I certainly think that something is around the corner very soon.
Mr. Sharansky?
I'm afraid we are facing the war. We, I mean, both America and Israel and all the world is going to the war,
Within the next few days.
probably.
It's a grim assessment, but I'm very grateful to all of you for letting me talk with you and hear something about your thoughts about the war. We'll be back with more in a moment.
Did you know it's tough getting business people to agree on what's best? Yet business people do agree. Nobody beats AT&T when it comes to long-distance service. In an independent poll where users rated their carriers, AT&T was unsurpassed in the best technology and best service categories and was voted #1 in overall satisfaction. So now that we've agreed on AT&T, it's back to business as usual. Quality, another AT&T advantage.
I don't understand where he is. He's never late. He'd call, wouldn't he?
You might.
Could he be at your place?
Danny. Hey, what kept you, counselor?
I'm walking out. The phone rings. My dealer called to find out if I'm happy with my new car.
That's not exactly what I expect from a car dealer.
That's exactly what I expect from my Toyota dealer.
Customer satisfaction, the cornerstone of the Toyota Touch.
No one can guarantee you a perfect world. A world where the unexpected never intrudes. But some of us know we'll be taken care of, quickly and compassionately. In an imperfect world, you're in good hands with Allstate, a member of the Sears Financial Network.
No matter where you live in this region,
go to the Source.
For the first time ever, get 1991 Fords at fleet prices at the Source.
Sunnyvale Ford.
Choose from 300 1991 Ford cars and trucks.
Below retail.
And pay nothing till April.
$49 delivers.
Make no payments.
Till April.
1991.
Buy below retail.
This sale ends Sunday, January 20th.
Don't be left in the dark.
Go to the Source.
Sunnyvale Ford. El Camino Real between Fair Oaks and Wolf.
If you wait, you will pay more.
The critics rave over Hamlet. 4 stars, the most entertaining Hamlet ever. Mel Gibson is thrilling, exciting, tremendous, terrific, incredible, dazzling, rousing. Glenn Close is wonderful, riveting, near perfection. Go see it. Hamlet. Rated PG. Starts Friday, January 18th at a theater near you.
Early Tuesday morning, and we are back live again from Amman, Jordan. I am joined by my colleague, Nightline correspondent Forrest Sawyer from Dhahran in Saudi Arabia, where quite literally the U.S. troop buildup is continuing to this moment. Forrest, other than that, any changes?
Well, there is a dramatic change in mood here, Ted. In fact, one very senior military official said in his estimation that for all the talk of last-minute diplomatic initiatives by the French or possibly an Arab try, there is, in his mind, no hope left at all. And so he is turning his attention to preparations for battle. As a consequence, we are seeing troops move very, very quickly up to the front. Navy Seabees are laying down gravel and roads, working 24 hours a day so that those armored vehicles can move along in what is in some cases mud here in the rainy season to get up to the front. And I was going to say the soldiers...
I'm sorry, Forrest, yeah. Please go ahead.
I was going to say the soldiers are turning their minds, of course, to war as well, Ted.
Up until this moment, everything has been preparation. Do you get the sense now that they are literally massing for the offensive if and when that comes?
That's precisely the sense you get. The troops that have been back along what is a firing range not too far from here, practicing, training, that's all over with now. They're moving up to the front. They are prepared to fight. And as you talk to the soldiers, and there have been dozens and dozens of interviews that have been conducted with them, you see their attention turning inward, and you see them get that long stare as they begin to prepare their minds for what they are now convinced is inevitable, and that is battle.
Do they have any sense, do you have any sense of when it is likely to happen?
The feeling here is, and you know everybody's always putting his finger up to the wind to try to guess what's going to happen, but the feeling is here that it's going to be sooner rather than later. Remember, it is Wednesday, 8 a.m. time here that the deadline will run out, and that leaves 2 nights, the 16th and the 17th, that will be moonless. Those will be perfect nights for an attack. They feel that there could be an airstrike for a period of some days or certainly weeks could take place, and then the ground combat forces, which are not quite yet ready, could begin what, if necessary, will be a ground assault.
Forrest Sawyer, thank you very much. As Forrest mentioned, or at least implied, from Valley Forge to Gettysburg to Iwo Jima, there has always been a time before conflict when America's young men prepared and thought and questioned. ABC correspondent Mark Litke is with the 1st Marine Regiment in Saudi Arabia.
I've never had a shot fired at me, and I'd like to know what it was like. And I'd like to know, as a man, if I'm going to be able to stay there and do my job.
A lot of people are afraid to go in, because a lot of people are afraid to die. And I'm afraid to die, but it's something that has to be done.
The will to fight and live is stronger than the will to fight and die. And I'm willing to match that up against any Iraqi at any time.
The men of Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment. An 11th hour briefing from the company commander.
The next couple days, the next couple weeks, and if it takes the next couple months, we've got to use every available minute to make sure that each and every one of you has got your part of the mission down, memorized, and you're ready to execute. Every Marine here knows his job. Every Marine here knows what sits on the other side of the border.
Wind's coming in.
Goes in!
Everybody go left. They were among the last Marines to arrive in Saudi Arabia. They could be among the first to see action.
Yeah, well, for a while it didn't seem like it was real. It just seemed like another training evolution. Yeah. But after a while it sinks in.
And it sinks in very deep. In these final days, training has been more intense, more focused. War no longer just a field exercise. At any moment now, they may be ordered to charge out of their amphibious vehicles directly into enemy fire.
It's going through your minds quite a bit, I think. You're coming out and you're trying to think through your mind that there's gonna be rounds firing at you. There's gonna be people there waiting to shoot you as you come out there.
It's time to think, Corporal Quezada. It's time to think. It's coming in.
It is hammered home in drill after drill. It takes momentum and violence to overcome the enemy. Being killed or wounded, an occupational hazard.
There's 2 types of casualties, right? There's KIA and WIA. If they're wounded, we patch him and we move.
We've already signed our life away, basically, to the United States. And I think coming here, we're willing to do whatever it takes. But I think there is that little bit of reluctance, that little bit of survival instinct that says this is not necessarily a healthy situation.
The men of Charlie Company have never been in combat before.
I got more crosses and medals than these dog tags. You wouldn't believe. I got one for my girlfriend, one for my family. You know, like the old saying goes, no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole.
mean, anybody in their right mind's got to be scared when you're going into something like this, but you just got to do it.
They have already learned there's much more waiting than fighting, and to ease their anxieties, there are lighter moments familiar to soldiers everywhere. Complaining about chow.
Look at this, Mom. They're feeding us better than you fed me.
Appreciating a hot field shower. Ogling a buddy's girlfriend.
Damn, that's my wife!
Savoring a letter from home.
Happy birthday. I gotta get home, man.
I keep thinking of my wife and my unborn child back home. My wife's 7 months pregnant right now. And that's what I think about, is whether I'm going to be able to see that child or not.
A little bit of violence. Some of the men say they'll be angry if they're denied the chance to be warriors, to prove themselves in battle.
I want to fight. I want to make them pay. Every last one of them. If we don't get a chance, I'll be disappointed, yeah. I'll go home alive, but I feel that a lot of us are going to go home alive anyhow.
Most would be just as happy as peacemakers, without ever having to fire a shot.
I have a wife and a child that in the last 17 months I've only seen for about 10 days. So I'd be more than happy to go home. You know, but if we're here, we'll do our job.
Whatever their feelings toward combat, they accept their role as Marines. The Marine Corps has an old saying that nobody wants to fight, but somebody has to know how. Should it come to war, these are the men who know how. This is Mark Litke for Nightline with the 1st Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment in eastern Saudi Arabia.
We'll have a final program note in a moment.
To help fight the corrosive effects of salt and water, every Lexus features airbag terminals plated in gold. Of course, we might have used a less expensive material, but it wasn't money we were interested in saving.
Just a reminder that as this crisis continues, ABC News will be covering events here in the Middle East on a continuing 24-hour basis. And as we approach the run-up to the UN deadline tomorrow night, we will have a special 1-hour Nightline report. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel and Amman Jordan. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been ABC News Nightline. If you wish a videocassette version of Nightline, the cost is $14.98, plus $3.95 shipping and handling. If you wish a printed transcript of this or any Nightline broadcast, please send $4 to Nightline Transcripts, 267 Broadway, New York, New York, 10007.
More Americans get their news from ABC News.
Import 4x4 in Northern California.
I know I wouldn't drive anything else.
And with option package savings on selected models, now's a great time to deal.
I did.
The more you know, the more likely you'll buy a Toyota. See your Toyota dealer today.
This is CNN.
Hello, I'm Lou Waters, CNN Center in Atlanta. Crossfire's up next, but first this update on events concerning the deadline in the desert. A last-minute appeal to Saddam Hussein to avoid war. It comes from United Nations Secretary General Javier Perez de Cuellar. That plea just 6 hours short of the UN deadline authorizing force against Iraq. That deadline now 4.5 hours off. Perez de Cuellar tells Hussein he's been assured Iraq will not be attacked if only it starts to pull out of Kuwait now. And he says the international community would address the Arab-Israeli conflict. The alternative, he says, is catastrophe.
As 15 January advances and the world stands poised between peace and war, I most sincerely appeal to President Saddam Hussein to turn the course of events away from catastrophe and towards a new era of justice and harmony based on the principles of the United Nations Charter.
Meanwhile, an uncomfortable calm at the White House. Inside, President Bush spent much of the day huddled with top advisors. Mr. Bush is described as at peace with himself, ready to make the tough decisions ahead. Reporters are being told military action could come anytime after midnight. Iraqi President Saddam Hussein spent the day on the front lines in Kuwait and Iraq. State television in Iraq is reporting Saddam was visiting his troops, urging them to be vigilant, saying there would be no compromises, and vowing not to leave Kuwait. Outside the White House, police estimated 7,000 protesters were marching. This is one of many anti-war rallies held in cities across the United States. Many of those in Washington said they would stand vigil outside the White House all night. We'll have more on the crisis in the Gulf in 30 minutes. Next, Crossfire.
From Washington, Crossfire. On the left, Mike Kinsley. On the right, Pat Buchanan. Tonight, must we attack? In the Crossfire, Reverend Jesse Jackson. And in New York, former Secretary of State Alexander Haig.
Welcome to Crossfire. It's 4.5 hours before the deadline for Iraq to be out of Kuwait. More than 1 million soldiers face off in the Arabian Desert, and there is just about no reason for hope that war can be avoided. Today, Iraq and the United States both rejected last-minute French peace initiatives. The White House repeated President Bush's assertion that war could come, quote, sooner rather than later, after midnight tonight. There were government-orchestrated pro-war demonstrations in the streets of Baghdad today, and anti-war demonstrations across the United States, including one that closed the Golden Gate Bridge. So, one last time, must we attack? Pat?
General Haig, Jesse Jackson, both you gentlemen ran for President of the United States in 1988. If you were sitting in the chair George Bush is sitting in tonight, what would you decide for the next 2 weeks, considering that United States credibility has been put on the line? We have issued an ultimatum. The president says he's going to move sooner rather than later. He says they must get out or they'll be forced out. What would you do if you were in George Bush's shoes?
First, it is an artificial deadline. We are not afraid that Hussein may attack America tonight. We're afraid Mr. Bush may attack Kuwait and Iraq tonight. And if that takes place, there'll be many people killed, Kuwaitis and Iraqis and Americans. Why not go on the diplomatic offensive since military deterrence and economic sanctions are working? Why set up an artificial deadline?
Well, the deadline's been set. General Haig, or Secretary Haig, what would you do if you were in President Bush's shoes tonight?
Well, I think, Pat, we've made every conceivable move we could make for peace, and I think politically the president should operate very, very quickly to bring this crisis to a conclusion. Militarily, he may want a little more delay, but I think the risks of delay are maybe outweighed by the political risks.
Al, Mr. Secretary, let me follow up on that. There's talk of the military says they would like to keep the Iraqi troops, the Iraqi army, on edge. They're keyed up for battle tomorrow, that it might be a good thing to have the Americans stand down for 72 hours or something like that before we moved, if we moved, to give us the advantage. Now, speaking as a military man, since we apparently are going to have the initiative, would you move tonight, or would you wait for the weekend, or would you wait for next week?
Well, I wouldn't wait for the weekend if my military commanders would assure me they are ready. I think 24, 48, or 72 hours would be helpful because it would tire the defending forces out in terms of the tensions involved.
Jesse,
go
ahead.
The focus must be on the goal to get Iraq, not a date to get Iraq out of Kuwait. Military deterrence is working. Iraq cannot expand. Economic sanctions are working. It's essentially a one-product economy. Oil is not coming out. Oil is not going in. In a sense, from a position of strength, time is on our side. Why engage in a war that will run up the price of oil and run down the price of blood?
Well, here's the problem, Jesse. 3 out of 4 people on this program are basically in agreement with you, and we have made these points again and again, but that debate is sort of over. At this point, George Bush's prestige is on the line. Not just that, the United States' prestige is on the line. Isn't it at this point unthinkable that the policy you and I might have preferred could actually be put into place as a practical matter?
It is not unthinkable. As a practical matter, we should take the initiative not just to French, to say if you come to the table that we can assure there will be no bombing, if you come to the table, the zone of dispute recognized by Kuwait, the U.S. and the UN dealing with oil pricing, oil gouging, landmarks and access to the sea will be dealt with in exchange for pulling back. And the UN Peace Conference, not the Hussein Peace Conference, is a factor in resolving the crisis in the region.
Al Haig, what would happen if the president adopted the strategies advised by Jesse Jackson?
Well, I think there would be a total discrediting of the United States, the United Nations, and all that we stand for in standing up to aggression in this crisis. I think it's very important to remember that deadlines have been set long ago. 45 days were available for this fellow to reconsider. What has amazed me is that he hasn't taken advantage of this, because he could have come out of it whole and psychologically perhaps a victory as we watered down the UN resolutions in the last hour.
But General Haig, do we really fear an Hussein attack tonight, or do we fear the fragility of our coalition? After all, there was 26 nations in the UN, not the entire UN. China, 1/4 of the human race, did not vote for it. The Germans are offering some marks, some money, but no people. The Japanese are offering some yen, but no women and no men. For others, we have forgiven their debts to be a part of it. For others, we've given some grants. For some others, intimidation. Are we more afraid of the fragility of the coalition than we are of Hussein himself?
No, Jesse, I think what we are doing is leading the world as we have historically done for many of the recent years in our history. We've been stood in very good stead by the support of Great Britain, by the United Nations, by the moderate Arab regimes in the region, the majority of the Arab League. All of these nations have stood with us. If you want to double-cross them and put every one of these Arab leaders in jeopardy, then a extensive concession of the kind you're talking about is the best way to do it. And that's why the coalition won't survive, because it won't survive internally.
If the issue is self-determination, does that mean that we now give Gorbachev a buy in Lithuania? Does that mean that we give the Chinese a buy in Tiananmen Square? If there is no deadline on South Africa, why the deadline, the artificial deadline, in this situation?
Well, you've raised a very good point, and it's precisely what is happening in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe to the global economy, to the third world, which has been put in great jeopardy with inflated energy costs because of the uncertainty of this crisis, that we have to put this crisis behind us, and I'm confident that we are united and prepared to do so, and that the outcome will be swift and decisive.
May I ask you just one question? If we, in fact, win the bombing war, do you have any sense of the cost of then having to occupy Kuwait and occupy Iraq once we will have won militarily?
Well, that assumes perhaps a worst-case outcome, Jesse. I think this leader will be disposed of by his own people. He's a minority leader in a minority party who is ruled by terror and murder and repression of his own people. And I think when the truth of that is known, we are going to see some very important changes in Iraq.
General, as former Supreme Allied Commander, give us your scenario for the first couple of weeks of this war. You're very optimistic. Give us what an optimistic scenario looks like.
Well, I'm not optimistic, because if there's anything that I've learned in participating in 2 wars in my lifetime, it's the uncertainty of conflict. But be that as it may, there isn't any logical calculus that can be made that would suggest that this should not be over in a matter of weeks. Not months, but weeks.
Okay, we're going to take a break now, and when we come back, we're going to take up the question, why, if Saddam Hussein is about finished, is he being so intransigent? Why has he refused even to discuss the French proposal for a Middle East conference?
Strategy makes your PC a powerful tool.
And now they've even added an encyclopedia.
Awesome. I do my shopping at home, pay my bills.
And I can learn something new. Prodigy now has a 21-volume electronic encyclopedia that's updated quarterly.
All right, Prodigy.
Just press a couple of keys.
Prodigy connects your computer to sports, news, shopping, and now an encyclopedia that never goes out of date, all for only $12.95 a month.
You have just got to get this thing.
It's even got an encyclopedia. Prodigy.
In stores everywhere.
Great food must be eaten in the morning. The man who wrote the book on Florida grapefruit is history.
You don't just have to have it in the morning. You can feel it anytime you feel it. Slice it if you like it as a treat. You just can't beat it. Florida grapefruit anytime.
Grapefruit, fresh from Florida and Florida's Indian River.
You don't just have to have it in the morning.
Ricola, the all-natural herb cough drop imported from Switzerland. Ricola has been soothing throats and relieving coughs naturally for over 60 years.
It's one of the most powerful devices on Earth. It touches each and every one of us. It's changed the destiny of nations, created world leaders, and toppled others. It can transport you across the globe, as well as to corners of the universe never dreamed possible. Nothing else has the power to cover our world like television, and nothing on television can cover our world like CNN.
Welcome back. A little over 4 hours from now, the UN ultimatum expires. Any hope for a deal with Saddam Hussein before the midnight deadline is dead. Some believe that after the deadline passes, the Iraqi dictator will feel he has made his point and withdraw from Kuwait. But they are few in number. 9 in 10 Americans believe war is virtually certain. Should President Bush proceed, what kind of war should he wage? We're debating those questions with Alexander Haig, who's in New York. He's the former Secretary of State. He's a former White House Chief of Staff to President Nixon and Supreme Commander of NATO in Europe and a 1988 candidate for the Republican nomination. And with Jesse Jackson, who was a presidential candidate in 1984 and 88. He heads the Rainbow Coalition. He is the shadow senator from the District of Columbia and host of the nationally syndicated Jesse Jackson program. Jesse, Saddam Hussein has been given by Perez de Cuellar and the French in the last couple of days de facto offers of the International Peace Conference he has talked about and requested on the whole Middle East. He has rebuffed them, rebuked them. He hasn't even responded. Is it not possible, if not probable, that Saddam Hussein prefers to have the Western imperialists, the Americans, attack him so he can be bloodied by the greatest nation in the world and thereby make himself a great Arab hero?
That may be a sense of fatalism in him. The price we pay for going in the ditch with him will have to stay in that ditch. I think that the artificial deadline, January 15th, was a diplomatic error. Now the president feels personally blocked in. We do not have to bomb tonight or tomorrow to win economically. Our military deterrence is successful, and our sanctions are successful.
All right, let me, General Haig, you said you feel that Saddam Hussein could be overthrown by his own people if he invites this war, but clearly he is inviting an American attack by total non-responsiveness to the French, Perez de Cuellar, everyone. Is there a possibility that he wants the Americans to strike him first because he thinks he can both survive and benefit from having had, in effect, being knocked down by the United States and survive?
Well, I think the most logical analysis of a very unlogical fellow, Saddam Hussein, would be that he has led himself to believe that he can bloody the U.S. and coalition forces, and that we will seek some kind of a settlement, and he will ultimately come out ahead. On the other hand, there is still enough time for this fellow, and there's a great deal of logic behind the fact that he might suddenly turn around at the behest of an Arab brother and begin the withdrawal, and this would put, I think, the United States and the coalition in a very awkward position.
It seems to me, General, that there are three things for certain. If we attack him, there will be massive Arab mobilization beyond that where their leaders now stand. Secondly, if he is attacked, no doubt he's going to fire at Israel. Israel will be duty-bound to respond. It must fly over Jordan and Syria to do so. Egypt will not join an offensive move against him. Thus, the whole Middle East becomes trapped in a conflagration. And let me say lastly, thousands of Kuwaitis are still in Kuwait. If we bomb Kuwait, we'll have to kill thousands of Kuwaitis to save them. What kind of logic is that?
Well, first, Jesse, the outcome you've described is a risk, of course. I think a little bit overdrawn. But if we were to back down now, in the face of his intransigence, those risks would become certainties, and we would have the very conflagration either now or later in the Middle East that you are so fearful of.
We don't have to back down. Just keep the economic sanctions noose tighter. He cannot grow. I was there. He has hotels but no customers. He has oil wells but no fields. Where can he go? And why must we rush the war on this artificial deadline? Is it that we're about to be attacked? Or our vital interest is about to be cut off? Of course not. What's the rush?
Jesse, there are a number of converging factors which support prompt action and prompt resolution of this crisis. First, the embargo is simply not working in the context that we visualize, and even the experts say a year to 18 months. Secondly, we cannot keep a forced posture in that desert for a prolonged period under these dreadful circumstances and expect it to be combat effective. Nor do we have the manpower base to do the rotations that we would hope we could do without a draft or some other more drastic reserve call-up.
Stop right there.
Thirdly,
was it a tactical
Jesse,
error?
Let me finish. Thirdly, the global economy is in a state of trauma. The developing world has been badly battered by the uncertainties which have raised oil costs up to $30 a barrel again today. We have the problem of Eastern Europe, which is being racked as it seeks to move to democracy by these same inflationary problems and a demand by the Soviets that they pay hard currency for energy. Thirdly, and very importantly, we have diverted our attention and our energies from the situation in Central Europe, where the Soviet Union is now rebuffing all of the major reforms that we applauded and welcomed over the past years.
Okay,
and the consequences of a weak...
General, you've got to stop right there. We've got to take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you about that very point. What kind of new world order is it when the Soviet Union is occupying Lithuania against its will?
No matter what shape you're in, when your hair starts to thin, you lose confidence. But you get it back with the Follicure system. An ampule of the Follicure formula massaged into the scalp every other day. An invigorating Follicure shampoo every day, and you're on your way. Follicure gives you fuller, thicker-looking, more manageable hair. The Follicure system. We grow confidence.
Listen to the trees. They're trying to tell us something about what our polluted air is doing to them and to us. Fortunately, there's an answer. Natural gas, the cleanest burning fossil fuel we have. It can help save the air and everything that lives in it. Listen to the trees, because air pollution is a problem hanging over all of us. Use natural gas and we'll all breathe easier.
America, you've been making a big fat mistake. You've been cooking wholesome food like this in butter. You've been cooking it in margarine. You've been cooking it in oil. Use all-natural Pam cooking spray instead. You can save 90% of the fat and calories in those things. No mistake about it. Pam, because how you cook is as important as what you cook.
Not long ago, these women would have shied away from these hugs. You would too if you were wearing a diaper. But today, Johnson & Johnson brings you the breakthrough. Serenity Guards. Bladder control protection so advanced you'll never need anything bulky again. Serenity holds as much as something 5 times its size, locking liquid into a gel that won't leak.
That's proven protection. So give yourself a hug for discovering serenity from Johnson & Johnson.
General Haig, they called World War I before it ended the war to end all wars. That didn't work out. This is supposed to be the war that's going to deter all future aggressors in a new world order. Yet here we have as our allies in this effort the Soviet Union, which is stomping on freedom in Lithuania even as we speak, Syria, which is more or less using this occasion to complete its occupation of Lebanon. What hope realistically is there for a new world order to come out of this mess?
Well, there isn't going to be a new world order because the world is simply not that simple. But I think the United Nations has spoken, our legislature has spoken, and now's the time for the American people to support our president and our troops in the field. And I'm going to be counted with that group.
Jesse Jackson, you talked to Saddam Hussein. What's his feeling about why the Americans are doing this? Why is he intransigent?
He sees this as an American Israeli conspiracy. He says if the issue is self-determination, why not apply it, if you will, he says over and over again, to West Bank and Lebanon and Grenada and South Africa and so forth. He says he believes that Bush will not talk to him because he already plans to attack. Or if he will not talk with him but talks with the clerk from South Africa, he thinks it's racist. He says, therefore, it may be my lot, it may be my destiny to bring America down. Now, for us, that's unthinkable, it's fatalistic, but his mindset is there. And I say to you, if we call this man irrational and bloodthirsty and Hitler, and then say, now we put the option of war or peace in his hand, he may choose war. Why would we put the burden of peace in the hand of the man we call irrational and bloodthirsty?
All right, what about Al Haig's point? The President of the United States has been authorized by the American Congress to go to war. We're here about B-52s have been moved up from Diego Garcia. If the president takes us to war, don't you agree that Al Haig is correct, that we got to stand behind the president, who's the commander-in-chief, and the American troops, and hope and pray that Americans win an early and quick victory?
We have to hope and pray for the American soldiers who are there, but reserve our right to challenge the judgment of the commander-in-chief. Congress gave Mr. Bush authorization for war, not a mandate for war. We do not have to attack tonight or this week. Let military deterrence, economic sanctions work, and let's go on a diplomatic offensive. Not just let France take the lead, we should take the lead. After all this, it's our men and women, not so much French and German and Japanese. Since we have the blood to lose and they have the oil to gain, let us leave no stone unturned.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Jesse Jackson. Thank you, Al Haig in New York. Pat and I will be back shortly.
I'm Lou Waters. CNN's nightly special report on the crisis in the Gulf is next. Thousands of anti-war demonstrators outside the White House protesting possible war in the Persian Gulf. And tonight, with the UN deadline just hours off, live reports from Saudi Arabia, Amman, the White House, UN, and Baghdad. Join David French and me after Crossfire.
It begins at dawn. They've come for you. And they want what you have. It's your bed. You're a Serta Perfect Sleeper. But it's the most comfortable spot in the house. The Serta Surface and Support only Serta builds in makes it that way. So if it gets a little late for breakfast, there's always brunch. Is it any wonder people are saying, I want my Serta?
Hey, Judy.
Yes?
Ounce for ounce, can you mix a bowl of cereal with more vitamin and mineral nutrition than Total?
Sure.
Well, have fun. That's great, but you need more calcium and iron.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You know, Judy,
Yes.
a bowl of all those put together can't top an equal amount of Total. One serving of whole grain Total has 100% of 12 vitamins and minerals. Seriously, for all this nutrition, nothing can top Total.
Well, sounds like I've got a problem.
As you watch this, your money is changing hands. To find out how and why, you need the latest business news at 15 minutes into each half hour, only on Headline News.
If a conflict breaks out, what tools of war could be used? Former U.S. arms negotiator Paul Nitze in an extended interview, Crisis in the Gulf, tonight 8 Eastern on CNN.
Pat, you were saying before the break that if the fighting starts, criticism ought to stop, and I think that's correct, but not just for the reason you gave, that we owe unthinking support to the commander-in-chief. That I don't agree with. The reason most people, including you, I believe, and myself and Jesse Jackson, oppose this war is not that we have opposed the goal of getting Saddam out of Kuwait. That everyone supports. The question is it worth the cost? Once the fighting starts, that cost can only be minimized by a quick victory, which we're all going to have to hope for. If at some point things get bogged down, then I think at that point criticism becomes legitimate again.
I agree. There ought to be a moratorium on criticism when the first shot is fired. Fritz Hollings made a good point. He voted against war, but he did say, when we go, if we go, we all go together. And I think that's exactly right. And I think if the first shot is fired, I hope that the American troops and the American Air Force achieve an early, quick, and as bloodless a victory for the Iraqis and the Americans as possible.
Well, I think everyone watching could agree about that. From the left, I'm Mike Kinsley. Good night for Crossfire.
From the right, Pat Buchanan. Join us tomorrow night for another edition of Crossfire.
For a transcript, send $3 to Crossfire Transcripts, Journal Graphics, 267 Broadway, New York, New York, 10007, or call 212-227-READ.